Good evening. This is Mark Caskey, and I'm doing my video on Module 6, Unit 3, Planning and Preparation for Leading. I think this is a really good unit to talk about because this is kind of the basis that I learned how to teach myself as it pertains to what I thought I knew versus what should be implemented based on the structure of your kids, especially in an inner city environment. As far as process and the purpose of reading, I feel like that is the basis of, in my particular case, 10th grade biology. You can't really go over a lot of the subjects unless they have a comprehension, but a lot of kids do not have that underlying comprehension as it pertains to reading and comprehension. It's hard for kids to connect the dots when you first have to go over prefixes and suffixes that they maybe should have known in environmental science or physical science. And then when it comes to test taking strategies, when it comes to reading and comprehension, they have a hard time with different style of questions, not necessarily because of their comprehension, because of their reading, which translates to a lack of comprehension. And so as far as the processing, word recognition, I think is key, especially with biology. A lot of the words will coincide to the meaning of the mechanism, what it does, whether it's the prefix, whether it's endo, exo, whether it's the suffix as it, A's or O's or OSC as it pertains to carbohydrates or enzymes. Having that word recognition definitely helps with students be able to feel confident with the subject, but also helping them connect the dots in terms of when we do best test taking strategies, what you know is the answer, but what you can infer is not the answer based off of the language. Another thing that I think is very important, like I just said, is as far as the decoding, being able to tackle a word based on the root words that you know already to help you comprehend the word. And I tell my students, even if you don't know what the word does, you can at least know what it means based off of the root words that are there. I think remediation, right, which is something that we, especially in terms of a GMAT course, we all know is important in terms of not only introducing new words in a way that is digestible, but introducing words that are digestible, but continuously allowing them to eat these words, right? So it, after a while, becomes something where the entire class feels confident answering it on their own, or to collectively as a class, which I feel is the most important. When I talk to my kids, like even in terms of like, all enzymes are proteins, but not all. And then all the kids at this point, because I say it every time or every day, know that not all proteins are enzymes, but they're familiar with the rhetoric in terms of being able to connect the dots when hopefully they have a test question. In terms of the second thing, in terms of comprehension, that goes to that remediation in terms of background knowledge, being able to remediate and regurgitate the information so it feels comfortable to the students and it doesn't feel new. I know a lot of times when you talk to students, you can teach them something for an hour, hour and a half, and if you go back to it the next week, it almost feels like you haven't taught it at all. So being able to, whether it's bell ringers or closing questions, kind of helps keep it fresh in terms of a constant rhetoric for the kids to know. I think it's also important in terms of different types of reading, and we can go into this when we talk about ELL learners, in terms of introducing different types of learning that is cohesive with different types of learning styles and cultures. And then that goes into the fluency. I feel like all of these things kind of piggyback off each other. I feel like fluency is when all of these things come together, where the kids feel comfortable with their reading and comprehension. They feel comfortable with the rhetoric or the comprehension, and now they're putting those two together to make inferences and have that fluency to remember the terms, remember the root words, and now they're able to make connections that can allow them to learn the material beyond reading and comprehension. I think that goes into autonomic skills. which can help them in terms of, having the word walls, which we'll go into later, which are very important in terms of the students being able to have those artifacts, whether it's the word walls, whether it's the posters, whether it's the CREs, that allows them to have a reference point to go back to. And then, the morphology, which again kind of coincides and wraps around everything in terms of the root words. And then the contextual awareness. This is in terms of my subject area, in terms of lab, this goes into hypothesis, and again, being able to interpret the data and being able to make those further inferences in terms of predicting and contextual clues, and then being able to make those definitions and explanations, again, based on those CREs. And then this also goes in terms of punctuation and data, which is a part of the reading and comprehension in terms of explaining your point. Then in terms of phonemic awareness, for English learners, EL learners, again, this kind of goes full circle with everything I've been talking about in terms of the root words, phonetic awareness, phonemic awareness, the difference between mitosis, meiosis, but understanding that those are two terms that involve the differentiation of cells in terms of growth, but in terms of two different pathways and two different organisms that are undergoing that process. With the ESL learners, one thing that I think is important is that they learn in their own language in terms of them adapting a new language. It's not just them abandoning their original language and learning a new one, but using the things that are successful in them learning their native language that can translate into their new language in terms of being an English language learner. There are some things that are phonetically different, but there are some things that can be phonetically attached that can allow them to learn easily or easier. And then having those things reiterated, whether it be through video, which I feel is very important, or allowing them to do tasks or projects that assimilate with their original culture, but to help them in this new language in terms of being an English speaking student is very important, because that gives them confidence. I think in terms of that phonetic awareness, it can be difficult for ELL learners, because one thing I've learned, they tend to group together. And so having the group instruction, but as well as independent instruction, but then what I like to think is more privatized instruction in terms of grouping EL learners with students who are higher level learners who are good in English, to help them collaborate. A lot of times students will not engage because they're afraid of being wrong. And so if you put them in environments where they feel confident in being right, or at least have somebody that can help them be right, that gives them the confidence to try. And then in terms of the phonetics, in terms of systematic language instruction, I think it's important to have the students, again, remediation, have them go over everything constantly. When I teach, I say the same thing over and over again. I even tell them in terms of the test will give you the same questions, similar, but in a different way. So being able to break down contextual clues, being able to break down phonetic clues, phonemic clues, and then there are some questions in the test where you may not know it, but you get to one that you do know, but answering that question will help you answer that question that was before, because they're very much similar and they deal with the same content. That goes with the thinking and self-correction, especially with test taking. And like I said, we do best test taking strategies. The first answer that they give is more than likely the correct one, and then they second guess themselves. And so giving the kids the confidence to know that the question that they chose was the correct one, and if they did choose the incorrect one, why it was the incorrect one. So going forward, they know to be confident in the question that they asked or that they answered previously. I think it's just as important as the instruction that you give to help them answer the question in the first place. And that goes to self-monitoring and self-correction in terms of being able to decipher the questions themselves and being able to make adjustments on the questions. But more importantly, like I said, being able to stick with their initial question and be confident about the their initial answer. Like I said, I would feel like the bulk of my lack of participation doesn't come from the reading and comprehension, even though that's very important. It comes from the confidence, feeling that they don't have that reading and comprehension. And so collectively, you have a group of students that may know the answer, but collectively, they don't want to be the first one to either get it right or get it wrong. Which I feel is easier said than done, but something that I feel is very capable of doing in terms of helping your entire class environment be confident in terms of the questions that they're answering. And then in terms of where I'm trying to get in terms of my kids being 10th grade, young adults in a biology class, evidence-based strategies. And so, there are a certain percentage of our kids who are already ELL or ESOL, and that should not be a hindrance. Studies show that learning more than one language or having the background knowledge for more than one language actually puts you at an advantage, right? Because if you learn one language, then you can speak another language, and it helps you to infer more than one thing in terms of experiences. Once you obviously cross that hurdle in terms of knowing and feeling confident in that second language. And then in terms of going through literary strategies, being able to feel confident in narrative and expository text, being able to, for lack of a better word, being able to contribute the way that you feel that you can contribute, like the other kids. A lot of my ELL learners tend to stick their own groups because, again, they don't want to be exposed or feel like they're different from their classmates, which has nothing to do with their intellect, but just has to do with their confidence in being exposed and being able to express themselves in a secondary language. And so to promote independent reading, to do things that doesn't allow themselves to necessarily be extroverted, be able to be introverted in that learning, I think is key. And that way they can feel confident with themselves first before they have to show that confidence or that extrovertness to others or other classmates. I feel like, especially when it comes to coming to a new country, or if you're a first generation, being able to have that confidence yourself, whether it is with not just outside learners, not with your teacher, but even within your peers of the same language, is important before you kind of step outside the box in terms of expressing that intellect in a zone or an environment that you're not necessarily comfortable in. So no, I think this is really amazing. There's things that I've been dealing with and are currently going through in my classes. I fortunately have a co-teacher who can help me with my ESOL or DES learners, but I can see I also have like 30, 40 kids per class, but I can see how not having that type of help can be very overwhelming when you have what I've noticed ESL or EL learners who are highly intelligent and get really good grades and do very well in terms of comprehending, but they don't have that confidence because it is a secondary language. So thank you very much, and you have a blessed day.